Hello, Andrew here again. This is episode 27 and it's day 23 of our lockdown, and it looks like it might be coming to an end, or at least an easing fairly soon. Today we're continuing in our series as we're looking in Matthew's Gospel, just quietly working our way through, and we're picking up the story in Matthew 10 verses 16 to 25. Now, over the last 3 days we've been considering Jesus' commissioning his disciples on their first missions trip, and he's been telling them who they're going to, and what their mission is, what they're going to do, and how they're going to deal with the people that they meet. And now he ups the ante a little bit, and so we pick up the text in verse 16 and we read through to verse 25. See, I'm sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of them, for they will hand you over to councils and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. When they hand you over, do not worry about how you are to speak or what you are to say. For what you are to say will be given to you at that time. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child. And children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all because of my name. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I tell you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher, and the slave like the master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more they malign those of his household. Pardon me. Well, I don't know how you make this, but this is a difficult passage. It's uncomfortable. And Jesus is sending out his disciples, as I said, on their first missions trip. And he's warning them of how awful it could be. Now, to you and me, certainly to me, a lot of it sounds like hyperbole. It sounds like, surely, this is totally overblown. And it could be. Yet, as I've reflected on it, it seems to me that at the heart of this, Jesus is warning us that there are no guarantees. Following the way of Jesus does not assure us of success. It doesn't assure us of prosperity. It doesn't guarantee that we're going to be happy. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be respected and liked by others. In fact, it could mean the very opposite. And we're being encouraged to not let this catch us by surprise. I have encountered many who believe that once they've committed their way to Jesus, they're entitled to protection. They're entitled to be kept safe. It's like they've taken out an eternal life insurance policy and are expecting Jesus to make sure that all the goodies come their way. They didn't sign up for things to go south, for the wheels to come off, for life to turn to custard. We run a series of billboards out the front of the church. And the last series I put up were a series of quotations from Jesus. So I'd put a quote up and then put Jesus at the end. Now, they weren't all direct quotes. The one that I used as a default board that I particularly like had the words, "I never said following me would be easy. I said it would be worth it." Think about that for a moment. I never said following me would be easy. I said it would be worth it. And you might be thinking, I don't remember that verse. I haven't seen it anywhere in any of the Gospels. And it's true, you haven't, because it isn't there. He didn't actually say those words. But they are embedded in his thought and in his teaching. When he says that if anyone wants to follow me, they need to take up their cross. When he says that in order to find life, you need to be willing to give it away. And when you start heading down that track with Jesus, you realize that he's saying there's no guarantees. This is going to be easy, because it probably isn't. In fact, you might find it to be not mission impossible, but at least mission very difficult. And yet, you will discover that as you do this and as you journey with me, it will be worth it. You get the picture. So it seems to me that it's just possible that Jesus is trying to warn his disciples, and he's warning us. And what I like about that is to know that to be forewarned is to be better prepared for whatever might happen. We're warned that we might find ourselves as sheep among wolves. This is how it could feel. Now, I just want you to imagine for a moment how that might feel to be a sheep, to be finding yourself surrounded by a pack of wolves. The most likely response, and the most reasonable response, and the most expected response will be to be one of fear. We would expect to be frightened. The problem is that fear doesn't tend to bring out the best in us. We tend to be more reactive than responsive. And it doesn't tend to draw the best out of others either. So when we're afraid and we operate out of fear, it tends to have a negative effect of the people around us and that we're dealing with. It seems to me that Jesus then is inviting us into a place of calmness and trust. The worst might happen. Embrace that possibility and then decide how you're going to be in that moment. Defensiveness or his hostility will not help either you or me or those people that we are dealing with. People tend to act negatively when they're afraid. It's true of others, it's true of us. And at the base of negative responses to Jesus, I'm wanting to suggest that fear is likely to be lurking. It may not look like it, but it's likely to be there. People get angry and aggressive when they're afraid. I suspect it's the biggest cause of rage is fear. They may deny this. They may think that their anger and would suggest it is perfectly reasonable in the face of our stupidity. I want to suggest that it's useful to assume that they might at some level be frightened, even though they're not aware of it anyway. Jesus then encourages us to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. There's a sense in this, it seems to me, that if we can find ourselves in that place, when we're surrounded by this pack of wolves, there's a sense that we've taken ourselves out of the place of victimhood. And that knowing that though we may not be able to directly control the behaviour of others, we do get to determine how we will be. And this is crucial. The question is not how others are behaving. I'm not responsible for them. I can't take responsibility for what they're thinking or what they're feeling. I can take responsibility for myself. I can take responsibility, and that's what it is. It's responding, ably, I would guess, to what's going on around me. That part is the bit that is in my corner. I get to determine ultimately how I will do this. I'm not an enthusiastic flyer. That's probably fear. At a rational level, I can describe to you why. There is something unnatural travelling 11 kilometres above the earth at around 850 kilometres per hour, where it's minus 60 degrees outside, and as you're sitting in a window seat, which I like to do, you're that far away from what on the outside of this thin coffin-like metal tube that you're flying in is certain death. Now, you might think I'm a catastrophizer, and you'd be right. I am. But I think about these things, and I think a lot of us at some level do. And so do the airlines. The reason that they provide stewards is not because we get hungry and need cups of tea and coffee on a 30 or 45 minute flight, or even an hour long one, or an hour and a half. We can survive without them. They're there to distract us. They're there to convey an aura of confidence and peace, so that we can be confident knowing that this is going to be okay. And it almost certainly will. At a rational level, I know that the chances of me dying are much greater in the car trip from where I live to the airport than they are in the flight from Christchurch to Auckland. Statistically, that is the case. And there were some who would know me well who would say, yes, well, given the way that you drive, Andrew, that's not at all surprising. A little bit unfair, but it could be the case. So here we have it. I do have a measure of discomfort, because in the end we're trusting that the maintenance engineers have done a good job, and that the people who are up the front flying this thing are having a good day. A couple of years ago I was set to fly to Auckland, and I was at prayer this morning, and I had just read the weather forecast, and that they were expecting gale force winds at high altitudes, and it could be very turbulent. And I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. And so I brought this matter before the Lord in prayer, and just expressed just a measure of anxiety about flying in these conditions. And there was an invitation to trust. And I became aware that I could not determine what was going to happen to the plane once I was in it. I could not have any effect on how it was going to be flown. And if the plane did indeed go into a nosedive and look like it was going to crash into the ground, I had two options. I could do what I anticipated will be the natural response, and will be to go down screaming. Or I could say, actually, that isn't going to change the outcome. In the end, my life is held, and my destiny is held securely in the grasp of the God who loves me. And whether we hit the ground or not isn't going to change that. It isn't going to change God's love and affection for me. And it isn't going to change the security with which my eternal destiny is held by this God. So I have a choice. I can either go down screaming, or I can go down with a quiet sense of knowing that I'm actually okay. I'm actually okay. And that might in fact help not just me, because it certainly would, it might actually help those around me as well. Well, the flight was turbulent. And interestingly, I felt a great deal of calmness, an awareness that it was actually okay. And even if we crashed and I died, it was okay. I wasn't alone. None of us are alone. And that might sound extreme. And yet it seems to me that to be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves, in the face of what might otherwise be terrifying circumstances, implies a measure of poise, of quiet confidence that allows us to be fully present. And when we are fully present, the possibilities of a positive outcome greatly increase. Just think about it. When you go into a situation, says Jesus, you go as sheep among wolves. But if the sheep is not afraid, if it can look at the wolf squarely in the eye, through the eyes of confidence, maybe even love, through the eyes of seeking to hear and to understand what is in the heart and in the mind of the wolf, what their anxieties and worries might be, there's a possibility of a different outcome. We're less likely, if we're in that state, to say or do things that pushes other people's buttons. We're more likely to be a non-anxious and calming presence that ultimately sets others at ease. I know, it can be easier said than done. Yet I know that the possibility for each of us is there. God bless you all.